Beneath the compacted soil of southern Italy, these AI reconstructed visuals strive to reawaken the breath of a silent empire that collapsed 25 centuries ago. Every event we are about to witness has been painstakingly vetted by our team from the primary accounts of Iamblichus and Dicarchus. Let us sit together, casting aside the sterile portraits of textbooks, to gaze into a hidden shadow of Pythagoras through this new lens provided by AI. It is time. We face a paradox, never truly decoded. Was this man the enlightened architect of human reason, or a cold-blooded tyrant ruling from within the shadows of a fanatical cult? The final fragment of truth awaits us behind the silent screams at Croton. Let us step into the trials of greatness, and I am Oxley. Beneath a compacted layer of carbonized soil in southern Italy, the earth yields a single piece of silver, a stater minted in the city-state of Croton around 510 BC. It bears no king's profile, only the three-legged tripod of Apollo, but this coin rests under a thick blanket of black ash, the undisputed residue of a mass slaughter. Beside it lies the foundational architecture of an empire, a triangle constructed of 10 dots, drawn on a scorched piece of parchment. The Tetractys, the man who carried these artifacts, did not pray to the gods of Olympus. They swore blood oaths to geometry. They believed numbers were the ultimate mechanism of absolute control. For 2.5 millennia, textbooks have handed us a meticulously sanitized portrait. We are taught to envision a gentle, white-bearded philosopher sitting peacefully in the sand, drawing triangles. We must incinerate that illusion. The surviving documents of Dicarchus and Iamblichus expose a vastly different entity. When a man named Pythagoras arrived in the war-torn territories of Magna Graecia in 530 BC, he did not build a school. He forged the most authoritarian political-religious syndicate of the ancient world. In his hands, mathematics was not abstract theory. It was the source code to monopolize the grain trade, dictate penal codes, and puppeteer the politicians of an entire region. But where did this unparalleled authority originate? Even today, historians fiercely divide themselves over the roots of this power. One half venerates him as the enlightened architect of Western logic. The other half points to the clay tablets of Babylon carved 1,000 years before he was born and poses a chilling question. Was Pythagoras a transcendent mathematical genius, or merely a megalomaniacal cult leader who smuggled Eastern knowledge and weaponized it into his own ironclad law? Whatever the truth, the syndicate he built demanded absolute submission. To touch this level of geopolitical dominance, the price of admission could not be measured in silver. Candidates were stripped of 100% of their earthly possessions. Every acre of land, every coin, transferred permanently to the syndicate's vaults. And then, the ultimate deprivation began, a mandate known as echimethia. 5 years of absolute, unbroken silence. Not a single spoken syllable for 1,825 days. A complete severing of the human voice to forge an army of ghosts. Thousands of days of isolation are not meant to find peace. They are engineered to kill the old self before constructing a new authority. The heavy iron gates of the Pythagorean compound did not open for those who simply understood geometry. According to the ancient records of Aulus Gellius, the first layer of filtration was deeply visceral physiognomy. He did not hand out written examinations. Pythagoras concealed himself on a balcony, observing the raw, unpolished nature of the candidates below. He scrutinized the rhythm of their footsteps against the stone. He tallied the frequency of their laughter. He watched the micro-contractions of their facial muscles when they were deliberately and viciously insulted in the open courtyard. Brilliance meant absolutely nothing if a candidate's nervous system could not endure deliberate humiliation. If they reacted with anger, they were thrown out. Only those who swallowed their pride and maintained a deadened expression were permitted to cross the threshold. But stepping inside was merely the beginning of their systematic erasure. Those who survived the humiliation were swallowed into the outer circle. They became the acous matikoi, the listeners. Before taking a single breath of instruction, the syndicate demanded total financial surrender. Every piece of silver, every garment of value was confiscated and locked away in the treasury. Stripped of their worldly identity, they were thrust into the dark. For 5 agonizing years, they sat cross-legged on freezing stone floors, forbidden to utter a single syllable. They were not even allowed to look upon the face of the architect. His voice drifted to them from behind a thick, heavy linen curtain. Absolute sensory deprivation. To the ancient Greek world, the right to speak and debate logos was the ultimate proof of a free citizen. By sewing their lips shut, Pythagoras was not merely training their focus, he was reversing the wheel of civilization itself. He stripped away their fundamental human right, actively transforming free men into an army of willing ideological slaves. What happened if the urge to speak overpowered them? There was no physical execution. The syndicate orchestrated something far worse, a total social death. If a word slipped from their lips, the remaining disciples would drag a heavy boulder into the courtyard. With chisels and hammers, they would carve the speaking man's name into the stone, erecting a tombstone for him while he was still standing there, breathing. To the syndicate, the man who opened his mouth was a corpse. His confiscated wealth was returned double, and he was cast out into the wilderness. To those left inside, the message was clear: your voice is your death warrant. But the suppression did not stop at the vocal cords. It clawed its way into their stomachs. We only need to examine the syndicate's ancient dietary laws, the strict prohibition against eating meat, and the absolute unforgiving ban on consuming fava beans. To this day, scholars tear each other apart over the fava bean decree. Was it a primitive understanding of a genetic allergy, or a dark, occult ritual tied to the souls of the dead? The truth remains buried. But the strategic outcome of this diet is undeniable. This was not a peaceful vegetarian lifestyle designed for health. It was a calculated starvation of the flesh. By depriving the body of protein and familiar comforts, Pythagoras drained the physical desires of his followers. An empty, craving stomach shrinks the ego. He broke their will to resist, starting from the hunger pangs in their guts, molding an army that knew nothing but blind obedience. By 510 BC, this grueling discipline had forged a weapon of mass destruction, and the silent vanguard was ready to test it on their opulent neighbor, the wealthy city-state of Sybaris. The historian Diodorus Siculus recorded a battle that defied conventional warfare. Led by Milo, the syndicate's top disciple, the Crotonian army did not just march with spears. Guided by the strategic geometry of Pythagoras, they manipulated the earth itself. They carved massive trenches and snapped the natural flow of the Crati river. Millions of tons of churning water and heavy mud were redirected straight into the heart of Sybaris. An entire thriving metropolis was drowned beneath a suffocating layer of sludge, no prisoners taken. just absolute geographic erasure. The power of the silent elite had reached its undisputed zenith, but atop this ivory tower, they dug their own graves. When the mud finally dried, tens of thousands of acres of fertile land were left abandoned. The mercenaries who had bled in the trenches demanded their share, but Pythagoras and the elite syndicate confiscated the entire territory, locking the wealth inside their own vaults. This brazen economic theft was the breaking point. The arrogant silence of the syndicate had planted the first highly combustible seeds of hatred in the hearts of the starving men holding the swords. The greatest threat to a rigidly constructed empire never breaches the walls from the outside. It ferments from a single, undeniable flaw within its own core architecture. Deep inside the inner circle, a disciple named Hippasus was examining a fundamental geometric shape, a simple square, with each side measuring exactly 1 unit. By applying their own sacred theorem, he calculated the length of the diagonal cutting across that square. The number he unearthed was the square root of 2. This was not merely a digit. It was a catastrophic anomaly, an irrational infinite decimal that spiraled into absolute chaos, never repeating, never ending. To the syndicate, the universe had to be built on perfect integers representing order, light, and absolute control. The square root of 2 was the embodiment of darkness. It was unmeasurable chaos. To accept it was to admit the existence of an abyss that their syndicate could never rule. The foundation of their authority was fractured. How did the most enlightened minds of the ancient world respond to this revelation? According to historical records preserved by Iamblichus, they dragged Hippasus out onto a boat into the deep waters of the Ionian Sea. They bound his limbs with heavy iron weights, and they pushed him overboard, executing him beneath the crushing pressure of the salt water. To ensure his absolute deletion from reality, they returned to shore and erected an empty stone tomb. But who actually gave the order to drown a man over a mathematical equation? Ancient records contradict each other in a terrifying way. Did Pythagoras personally sign this death warrant to protect his absolute power? Or had he completely lost control? Watching helplessly as the fanatical zealots he created took matters into their own hands. Whatever the truth is, the sacred silence of the Brotherhood was now officially stained with blood. While the elite drowned their own to protect a numerical illusion, a geopolitical reckoning was brewing in the cobblestone streets of Croton. His name was Silent, an aristocrat possessing immense generational wealth and ruthless ambition. He demanded entry into the highest echelon of the syndicate. Pythagoras observed his demeanor and delivered a blunt, uncompromising rejection. The denial had nothing to do with Silent's intellect or his ability to grasp geometry. He was barred because he failed the fundamental test of restraint. He could not control his own tongue. This rejection was a fatal miscalculation of human nature. Pythagoras grossly underestimated the destructive power of a humiliated oligarch. Silent did not retreat to study triangles. He weaponized his vast fortune, funneling silver directly to the exhausted, mud-covered mercenaries who had just annihilated the city of Sybaris. These were the men who had bled in the trenches for Croton, yet were completely excluded from the spoils of war by the silent ruling class. Cylon pointed their collective, simmering rage toward the heavy oak gates of the Pythagorean compound. The gap between the ruling intellectuals and the starving militia mutated into an armed, heavily equipped mob, marching with singular intent. The armed mob descended upon the grand estate of Milo, the very epicenter of the syndicate's power, where over 40 of the highest-ranking mathematicians were holding a closed-door assembly. At this exact intersection of history, Pythagoras faced the ultimate survival choice. He possessed the authority to break the unyielding mandate of Ecomethea. He could have unbolted the heavy doors, step out onto the balcony, and use his undeniable charisma to speak directly to the mercenaries. He could have negotiated a political truce, sacrificing a fraction of his aristocratic pride to save the lives of his most devoted disciples. But the architect of the silent empire chose the arrogance of his own design. He refused to justify his mathematics or his authority to commoners. He kept the doors firmly bolted, choosing the absolute purity of silence over the chaos of negotiation. An absolute death warrant had just been sealed for the entire syndicate, and in a ruthless twist of irony, it was signed by the very hand of its architect. Time, from this exact moment, was no longer measured in years or days. It was measured only by the creeping spread of the flames. The mob did not understand philosophy, but they understood the nature of fire. Torches were hurled against the wooden pillars and dry thatched roofs. Flames rapidly consumed the architecture of the elite. The impenetrable silence that had forged their unparalleled geopolitical power now acted as a locked cage. Over 40 of the greatest minds of the ancient world were either burned alive as the heavy, blazing roof collapsed, or mercilessly hacked to pieces by the malicious blades as they desperately tried to force their way through the burning exits. The empire of silence was entirely incinerated. The flames at Croton were merely the ignition point of a region-wide purge. Pythagoras, now 80 years old, managed to escape the initial slaughter. He fled north, seeking sanctuary within the heavy stone columns of the Temple of the Muses in Metapontum. But the armed militia did not need to burn a sacred temple to finish the job. They understood the brutal mechanics of a siege. They erected a massive barricade, sealing off every exit. According to the historian Dicaeurchus, the architect of the universe's perfect proportions was locked inside, condemned to 40 days of forced starvation. We do not need to speculate on the despair of his final hours. We only need to observe the grim reality of flesh and bone. 40 days of severe, relentless deprivation. The most formidable intellect of the ancient world was utterly powerless against the inevitable metabolic collapse of an 80-year-old human body. Muscle tissue slowly atrophied. Vital organs shut down in sequence as the body consumed itself to survive. The man who commanded hundreds of disciples to remain silent to hear the music of the spheres died in absolute, agonizing silence, entirely alone on the freezing marble floor of a temple. Yet, the brutal discipline he forged did not entirely fail. Pythagoras himself never wrote down a single equation. His rule of absolute secrecy meant his legacy existed only in the memories of his surviving disciples. As the purge spread, the few who escaped the fires of Croton fled into the treacherous mountains. They carried no gold, only fragments of animal skin inscribed with geometric proofs. And here lies the ultimate historical irony. The exact same ruthless discipline, the thousands of days of sensory deprivation, the enforced fasting, and the extreme isolation they endured in the compound was the exact mechanism that allowed them to survive in hiding. They endured the freezing peaks and the gnawing hunger without breaking. They knew how to disappear into the shadows because they had been trained for half a decade to be walking ghosts. Nearly a century later, a descendant named Philolaus compiled these hidden records and passed them to a young philosopher named Plato. Without the agonizing isolation and the blood spilled in Croton, the foundational geometry of the modern world would have been erased. But as we look back at the blackened ruins of this empire, a chilling question remains unanswered. To this day, Historians are fiercely divided over the true nature of his demise. One half firmly believes Pythagoras died purely because of his own unyielding arrogance before the mob, but the other half looks at the ashes and asks a much darker question. Was the fire truly orchestrated by Cylon alone, or did the highest-ranking disciples secretly compromise, allowing the flames to consume their aging, inflexible leader in order to immortalize him as an indestructible myth? Did the syndicate sacrifice its architect to save the architecture? The truth remains permanently buried beneath the scorched earth of Croton. What we do know is the undeniable law of human achievement. History does not operate on the applause of the crowd. It is forged in locked rooms where individuals accept being completely forgotten to sharpen their only weapon. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the sound of absolute, merciless focus. We will keep this fire from ever going out until we meet again on the next journey. And I am Oxley.